and welcome to TPM 2023 here in Long Beach, as presented by S&P Global Market Intelligence. I'm Steve Ferreira, your host on Motion Freight TV. We're here today with a good friend of mine, Eric Johnson, Senior Technology Director at the Journal of Commerce. Eric, I'm really pleased that you're here today. Thanks for joining me.
I'm so glad to join you here, Steve.
Wow, I mean, you're such a legend, and there's nobody better. That we just got done running TPM Tech, just a world-class event. Just can't wait to hear. And I think to tell the audience, what are some of the, say, three of the big hot tech trends that you're seeing as a result of TPM Tech?
Yeah, I would say that the three kind of big issues that emerged. One, around data quality, still an issue after all these years. I know this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart.
Absolutely.
And it's, I think, something, actually, Peter mentioned it at TPM as well, that it's sort of strange to sit here in 2023 and still be addressing data quality issues. So I think there's a real impetus around making that something that gets solved over the next few years. Automation in logistics, I think we're just starting to get our arms around what that means from a intelligent automation, meaning decision making, which is, I think, far off in the future, all the way down to sort of more practical uses of automation right now, meaning system, data from one system being automatically sent to another system. So there's not a person doing that, but it's a system doing it. So that there was a lot of discussion at TPM Tech around that. And then I think the big issue that we sort of permeated all the sessions was, what is the difference between a digital forwarder and a traditional forwarder? And is there much difference now? And we tried to really address that topic through a bunch of different panels. I think the consensus was that gap, wherever it was or whatever existed, is pretty narrow now.
So you feel in your heart of hearts the three important tech issues that came out: standardization of data,
quality
data.
Before standardization, just quality.
Quality is a great win. I look at standardization too, because sure, if you look at the EDI, the 310s is still really, and they're not in the best of state.
Right.
There's still a lot of cleanup work that has to go into that.
Right.
It's really interesting that we're talking about this. Back in the 80s, when I was with Sealand, we hired, I think, Ernst & Young or somebody, and we came up, they were trying to develop natural language. Mm-hmm. And it's so interesting. It reminds me of, where I'm going with, just ChatGPT.
I will tell you, ChatGPT came up probably 50 times at TPM Tech, to the point where I joked that they were a sponsor. They must have been a sponsor, because it came up so much. Everybody wanted to, they were either joking about it or they were talking about real applications of it. So yeah, it's super interesting.
But I have to ask you, I've known you for a lot of years. I remember we were at a TPM maybe 7-8 years ago, and I don't think you and I had a chance to talk about this topic, but all I would hear is blockchain.
Yeah.
Blockchain. And I think maybe they moved one container on the blockchain. So I guess my question is that, what's happening? This is it's so great here. What can a BCO that is struggling and listening to us today, that, what would be one takeaway of something maybe under the radar that you see as being super useful for this year? For example, could the ChatGPT incorporate them, or could something incorporate to a BCO how they can get better early warning on detention or demurrage? Is there any one tech trend that you think might have an upper hand? Make sense?
Well, it's interesting you brought up detention demurrage, because I actually think, so rather than ChatGPT, which is super interesting, but it's too embryonic right now.
Agreed.
To actually put into an enterprise in any sort of scale. There were a lot of technology providers at TPM Tech, and just in general that I've spoken to, they're working on it internally. They're working on a program, and instead of coding it, they're having, they're asking ChatGPT to do something. So that's going to accelerate what they're doing kind of underneath the radar.
Sure.
From a BCO. You mentioned detention demurrage. I think that has been a super interesting element from a adoption perspective. Importers, to me, have said we need to get a handle on D&D like we never did before. Even as the problems that were causing it over the last 2 years have mostly been rectified, there's still a need to sort of ring fence what that budget looks like.
Agreed.
I'm sure you see it all the time, right? Where, a CFO is saying, wait a second, we paid how much in D&D the last 2 years? And even if we're not now, we can't ever let that happen again. So I do think that's an actual application area that importers are super interested in.
But how will it enhance it though? How could it
How
possibly?
will what ChatGPT do? Or
You think ChatGPT?
no, I don't know. Not yet.
But
Not yet.
what can enhance the BCO's view of detention demurrage? What will it take?
It's a good question. I think, well, so alongside the software world, there's all this regulatory stuff.
I want to talk to you about that in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, where, the FMC is taking a keener interest in some of these cases, even at fairly low dollar value amounts. So that is going to be a forcing function in some sense that, importers and more importantly, the carriers, terminals that are billing them are going to have to take a closer look at a bill before it's sent out and make sure it's accurate. So some of that will happen as a result of regulatory pressure. But a lot of it is the shippers just need, they need a sort of an early warning signal when they're about to run into per diem.
I agree.
They need ability to capture an audit trail ground, when a container was outdated, when or empty was returned. Did they try to make an appointment? All of that stuff has just been sort of, it's been managed in a really unstructured way. And as a result, it's really hard to disprove a bill. Now, again, back to the regulatory thing, there is a part of OSTRA, as I understand it. Tell me if I'm wrong on this, because I know what follows a lot more close than I do.
Right.
Where at some point the carrier is going to be responsible for issuing an accurate bill. They can't bill and put the onus on the shipper, the customer, to question it and say, no, it's not right. And the onus is going to be on them to make sure that they are billing accurate.
That's right. And as of, I think it was June 18th, actually of 2022, unless the carrier issues a true and accurate invoice, there's a good chance to go back and verify or dispute it or knock it back or, take it out of the aging system, which is really, I think, an important system for BCOs to survive.
Yep.
I caught one of your sessions yesterday with, I think Rebecca was on it, the attorney, and you're talking about this kind of issue of regulation. And, I've been fortunate to be an expert witness at the FMC level 4 times on these cases. And this is my opinion. And I'm wondering what your outlook is on it, because, with the Biden administration, with the FMC, it's been a lot of governmental take on this. And, clients I meet, it's almost as if, Eric, it seems to me that it's almost as if BCOs think that the government will be the savior, that the government is a saving grace. It's the end game that they're shooting for. But here's my point. My point is that I think that's good in maybe 3 or 4% of these big ticket cases.
Right.
I totally disagree that demurrage and detention for smaller values, 100,000 here, 200,000 here, I believe they can be settled commercially.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little scared that so much emphasis has been placed on FMC.
That the FMC is essentially going to become a small claims court.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, right.
I don't know how much you can go into that. Can you give me a kind of a take on?
I agree. I mean,
see that?
One of the things we talked about in that session you were referencing is this sort of death by 1,000 cuts that shippers and their drayage providers get subject to, where, it's 800 extra here, it's 1,500 extra there. And you sort of say it's not worth pursuing that individually. But if you look back and say there's 30 bills, they're all wrong. Collectively, it's a decent amount of money.
Right.
But can you bundle them all together? Are they with 10 different service providers? Do I have to pursue those claims independently? The FMC is not set up to handle a million different complaints. So I think what you heard Chairman Maffei say in his session yesterday was that the idea is to create regulation that compels the market to figure out commercial responses to problems that arise.
Right.
So
right.
And we're hearing this on that panel that I led yesterday. We heard it a little bit where Allison Levitt from the Wine Shippers Association said they're starting to see where carriers are more open to sort of saying, oh, when a shipper says the bill is inaccurate, they're more willing to sort of say, okay, we'll rectify that. We're not going to just ignore your emails about us saying that the bill is inaccurate. So I think that's what you're getting at, is if the regulations compel a commercial resolution to some of these smaller ticket items,
yes,
and that's, I think, then it's worked well. And then if it's a $250,000, both parties are being intransigent about it, that's when the FMC should be stepping.
I think everything you said is fair and accurate and balanced. I think that what smaller amounts lead to bigger amounts. So I think that when you see something that you can correct commercially, right? Let's say maybe you climb the mountain a little bit on it and you get some traction. But maybe there are bigger pieces that come out as a result of that. And then maybe at some point you have to perhaps petition the FMC for relief. But I believe a lot of this can be handled commercially, in my opinion.
I agree. But, from a shipper perspective, they've had, years and years and years of, kind of non-response on this issue, total years. And so they're conditioned to think we need someone or something to help us. So it's really, the onus is really going to be on the carriers to sort of not let it get to FMC level.
Now let it fester.
Let's address it when it's being pointed out. So yeah, really interesting sort of stuff over the last year around this.
Big time. And I think it's happening, and we're in a little bit of a time lag. And I think it's going to be a huge issue for 2023.
Yeah, I agree.
You're listening to Steve Ferreira of Ocean Freight TV and my special guest, Eric Johnson, Senior Technology Director at the Journal of Commerce. Eric, I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about maybe where BCOs might benefit from our expertise, or your expertise especially, and maybe look at a couple of things that might not be on the radar right now. And if you can comment on this, maybe on an outlook, I totally get it. Sure. Like, what would you say if you're in your crystal ball? You have ability so well from I know you to kind of think about the future. Maybe two things in 2023 that'll surprise.
Ooh, that's a good question. And my crystal ball, I know it's an old joke, but my crystal ball has been broken. I try not to look too much into it. I guess the one thing I'm curious about seeing, because I would have presumed coming after the last 2 to 3 years where we saw, I don't think supply chains got broken. I think they got stretched to their limit. And you would hope as a BCO that it will never in their careers get stretched to that same limit. But I guess my suspicion would have been that once we got a pause, like we've got right now in terms of freight demand.
Yes.
And you could kind of exhale, sit, and your hair wasn't on fire 20 hours a day like it has been. Yeah, everyone needed a pause and a break. But coming out of that, would they be able to take the, sort of the desperation of the last 2 years and translate that into investment and scrutiny in a good way from a C-level perspective? Not just the chief supply chain officer, but like the CEO that was checking in every day to make sure that they had ocean capacity. Are they going to now check in every month? Are they going to check in quarterly? Are they going to kind of just give lip service to you now that everything's normalized? Or are they going to fundamentally say on a consistent basis, you need to have X amount of budget. You need to have this many people. We need to be talking strategically about which 3PLs you use so that the next time there's even a tenth of this disruption, we're in a better place to handle it. Because, if it's a public company or even if it's a private, the owners and shareholders, I don't think they're going to take, oh, well, this is just another supply chain situation. They're going to be like, well, you had a chance to address it, or what did you do to address it?
Eric, there was a famous case years ago where it was just the way that the company was set up. It was Black & Decker, and Black & Decker had a very unique setup where their BPO logistics had board seat, or not a board seat, but a weekly seat with the CFO and CFO. And I thought that was a very unusual setup going back 5-6 years ago.
Extremely.
Now, right, you would think after Containergeddon that would be more prevalent. Now, but I think people have taken their foot off the pedal a little bit. They see the rates, a little bit more in their favor. And I worry that, if consumer behavior changes, we might get our foot back on the pedal, and that consistency of connection is not there.
When the urgency goes, so I think of, if you think of like a big multinational company,
right?
The CEO it's almost like facing the same things that a president does, right? They're not just worried about supply chain and logistics. They're worried about 50 things across the organization, and only 5 of them are pressing concerns at that moment, right? And obviously our world was the pressing concern for 2 years, maybe more,
right?
It's no longer potentially that pressing concern. It's probably like the 10th or 12th, right? So it really is going to be kind of on a company by company basis about how much they consistently integrate that logistics perspective to make sure that they're not just kind of ticking a box and saying, okay, things are good, we have capacity. We're back to ocean freight as a utility and not ocean freight as a luxury. And so let's move on to the other crisis in this other part of the business, right? So
I agree. Don't you also, on the other hand, like I brought this up with Peter this morning, Peter Churchwell, and we talked about TPM Academy, for example, some of the great things that are coming out of these sessions.
Jam-packed.
I would love to see that carry over yearly.
Yeah.
So that the BCOs were learning things exactly like we're talking about today.
Yep.
And that it was close to heart, close to mind.
It's funny you say that. I was actually talking to a colleague. We were talking about how busy those sessions have been. And it does feel like we ought not to wait 12 months to have these types of things and have it be more ongoing. There's a lot of hunger.
Right.
You know, I think what's really interesting is sometimes I step back and I go, I'm a journalist. Why are people who are actually moving freight calling me and asking my opinion about things? In the old days, I was the one calling them and asking them to understand it. And I think there is a thing where people are so consumed by their day-to-day, they lose touch with kind of understanding what the rest of the world, even their own world, is doing a lot. So obviously an event like this kind of puts you back into that big world that we live in, but doing it on an ongoing basis, I think, is like super important. So,
I mean, I'll be quite open. I think, I got to make another pitch. You should have this live, we should do these TV shows and, bring education back. I mean, I think this is a huge thing.
There's a big demand for it, obviously.
Absolutely. And, you look at the number of new participants are all around us. I mean, there's so many new folks, and it's so great to have them join our industry.
It is. And to be excited about our industry.
To be excited.
They're not doing entry-level jobs, and they may go do something else. They're purposely come to our industry.
And they're not afraid to jump in either. But I think that they just need the stewardship and the guidance of these kind of things. Like, Dan Gardner's always done yeoman's work to kind of help lead that academy. And then there's so many other excellent providers that are able to give, the credibility that education.
There's no shortage of experts here. I mean, you could give a not a 101, like a 301 audit.
Give a PhD class.
Yeah, right.
As we kind of wrap up and think about the future, one of the things that you and I have done a lot together, just so the audience knows, talked a lot about competitive balances in the Trans-Pacific and freight forwarders and direct ocean carriers. Yeah. One of the things that concerned me a little bit, and I'm not sure if it's on your radar, but I noticed, for example, the consolidation of the industry when the rates go down, some of the forwarders were letting some folks go.
Right.
Carriers are interested in these end-to-end or edge-to-edge type services to serve the
integrator strategy.
Exactly. Could you maybe shed light from your tech expertise where we might see that thesis take us this year?
Again, I'm really bad at predictions, but I the way I look at this is, there was before 2012 and there's after 2012. What I mean by that is 2012 is when we started to see venture capital sort of flood into the industry, and we started to see proliferation of tech solutions. It didn't mean there was obviously a lot of tech before 2012, much of it coming out of the .com boom, the stuff that actually was meaningful.
Absolutely.
Right. Yep. And stayed and was important. But it's just the number of logos that have exploded in the last 10 years come on the scene in the last 10 years. So the way I look at it is, I think there was a presumption from a lot of investors into those companies that this market was ripe for consolidation across the board, meaning fewer names, concentration, bigger market share for the names that remained, some sort of something that maybe looked a little bit more like the ocean carrier landscape and less like the forwarder and tech provider landscape. And what has actually happened, and I've been talking about this for what feels like 5 or 6 years, is we've moved from one type of fragmentation to another type of fragmentation. It's just a tech-enabled fragmentation where tech is in the hands of a lot more players.
But you said the key word there, fragmentation.
Does this feel any less fragmented? I mean, there's more vendors here than there were last year, and there's, way more than 3 years down.
But the sheet, I think you and I were talking about it. It was all their logos, and then there was a sheet that showed which ones went out of business.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Of course. Yeah. So, I mean, but I get it though. It seems like that's all we keep talking about, So it's like, I don't know if there's any like, forgive me for saying it like this, like forward leaders, like, I mean, sure, we know who they are, but there's a lot of other players too.
For every company that has a big funding round, there's 3 companies are working really under the radar and doing great things and have happy customers, and they're building their business a little bit different way. And neither one is right, by the way. I mean, I will say this, people talk about venture capital as if it's like performance enhancing drugs or like it's illegal. It's not, there's nothing wrong with venture capital. It is an asset class, and some companies choose to use it and others don't. And,
Right.
And I don't think it's as unfair an advantage as a lot of people sort of presumed it was a few years ago. But to your point about where it all shakes out, I think this is an industry that likes choice. And I think without even thinking about it on a subconscious level, they sort of divvy up their business in a way that creates an atmosphere of choice, an environment of choice, so that, yes, Maersk and CMA have integrator strategies, and they will definitely, that will be attractive to some companies. There's a lot of companies where that's not attractive. They will want to go to a tech-enabled 3PL. And there's other companies who are very happy to have a relationship-based 3PL. And that, I don't think, is going away anytime soon.
And you know what? I think this is such an important point, Eric. You're raising incredible points as you close out our great interview today. I think for the audience and the BCOs that are watching us today, you have to realize that not one size fits all. And don't think that just because, competitor is doing it, you need to do it the same way. Eric speaks volumes about the fact that we're in a niche and a sub-niche opportunity with a lot of these tech and operational opportunities that you have the chance to meet these providers at TPM and call your own shots and what works best for you. But you've got to lay out the land, you've got to flesh it out, and you've got to make sure it fits your budget and it fits your operational structure, and make sure you do some test runs and some milk runs to make sure the tech works for you. I think that's, probably.
Yeah, just go and research and have conversations. I mean, just like you would have conversations with an NVO about space, have conversations with a tech provider.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid with it. I think that what we're saying here is that we've got 2 guys here. Eric's an expert. I'm a industry observer, and I think that Eric says everything is best that can be done. And I think that as we start to look at, just one quick question, Eric. It's TPM 2024. You and I are sitting here again. What was the one big thing that happened 2023, just in closing? What would you think that we would be talking about next year?
Okay, so don't hold me to this next year when someone's going to drag this out, but I have a sense that the volume recovery is going to sort of sneak up on us in the second half of the year.
I totally agree with you.
I mean, I think at some point there's 3 reasons I would say. One is, at some point all the excess inventory gets drawn down and people actually need stuff. Number 2, we're only 5 months out from the holidays, and if no one's ordered anything for the first half of the year, or relatively low amounts, they're still going to need holiday volume, right? And that will start to normalize. And then the third thing, I had a 3PL tell me toward the end of 22 that at some point shippers need to keep their overseas suppliers in business. And 1 quarter of low orders or no orders, manageable. 2 starts to get a little dicey. You start to get into 3 and 4. How is that supplier even going to stay in business? And they're not going to be there when you actually need to order something from them. So I have a sense that we keep getting surprised by everything. And I would say that the rebound is going to surprise us.
I'll tell you what, you read my notes. That's the number 1 idea that I had for next year too. I totally agree with you, Eric. I think you're spot on the money. Now, in closing, I want to thank my special guest today, Eric Johnson, Senior Technology Director at Journal of Commerce. You can find Eric at the Journal of Commerce. Eric also runs an incredible Substack on LinkedIn. If you're not connected with him, you need to be connected with this man because he knows and understands everything tech in the ocean freight industry. Eric, it's been a pleasure to have you as my guest today.
Thanks so much. Thank you, guys. It's so fun.
Thank you again.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Enjoy.
Thanks.